Boa tarde, nós estamos aqui com o Michael McDowel, que é do movimento Black Lives Matter nos Estados Unidos, vive na cidade de Minneapolis, e agora nós vamos conversar sobre os impactos, enfim, do Covid na periferia norte-americana, nas vidas dessas pessoas. So, good afternoon, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. As good as I can be in light of this pandemic. It's definitely affected my family, so it's been challenging, but I'm doing all right.
So you've got relatives who've been infected.
Yes, unfortunately, I had one of my step aunts. She passed away of COVID-19, and it's because she had other health complications, breathing issues, diabetes, and that's pretty prevalent in my family, just having heart issues or asthma or high blood pressure, which makes you vulnerable. So they're already saying that, like, Black folks specifically, because of how intentionally our communities have been divested in, where we're getting hit pretty hard by this.
I think it's an especially serious issue in the United States because most major economies in the world at least have some form of universal health care, which is simply not the case in the United States. Like, even in Brazil, we have it. So yeah, what was it like for you and your family? Do you have private insurance?
Yes, so I do. And most of my family, they're either on Medicare or some form of like, or form of private insurance through their job, or like some state assisted healthcare. But with there not being universal healthcare, it's been really hard to just get the regular services we need. Like, I'm lucky to get healthcare through my job.
All right, yeah. No, talking about the pandemic as a whole, I mean, it started out as a middle-class disease, but like it's now being suggested that it could soon unleash a crisis, a widespread crisis in the slums, like all over the world. It's being discussed. Can you see it happening now in Minneapolis? Is it already encroaching in the slums and in poorer areas of town?
Definitely. And I get a little emotional when I talk about it, just because I was having a conversation with another organizer about this who lives in Philadelphia, and the East Coast region of the United States is getting hit really hard by this, especially in New York. And one of the things that we were talking about, like, as this began to like pop off, we're just like, I wonder who this is going to affect the most, and I wonder who the state is going to allow to ultimately die, because they have to make those decisions, like who gets those beds, who gets those ventilators. And the closest state to us is Michigan, and Detroit has a very high Black population, and I believe it's like I believe it's 40%, and 70% of that 40% has contracted COVID and has been affected by COVID. And so it's just, with that statistic in and of itself, it's wild. It's like we can see that this is disproportionately like affecting Black and also Indigenous communities because of how intentionally under-resourced they've been. For instance, in our hood or our slum here, it's labeled a national food desert. So you can't get healthy food anywhere in that community. You have to go outside that community to get anything healthy. So it just promotes, high blood pressure. It promotes diabetes. It promotes all these things that now make us a vulnerable community.
Yeah, well, one issue that's really closely related to this COVID pandemic is housing, public housing, which is a major issue nowadays. Like, in many poorer communities, you have many people living like crowded under the same roof.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an issue in Minneapolis as well?
So not specifically Minneapolis, but if you go to one of our like sister cities, like Chicago, for instance, where density is a thing, where you have, buildings that are very close to each other, it's easier for the virus to spread. So we have seen that happen in Chicago. We've seen it happen in New York. We've seen it happen in Philly and Boston, like all these areas that have really high density. So we have about, what, almost 400,000 people in Minneapolis. And so it's not that big of a city. You can go outside you can drive for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and feel like you're far from the city, like when you leave the city. And Minnesota has actually been a pretty good state when it comes to keeping the COVID numbers down. Because unlike our sister states like North Dakota and South Dakota and Iowa, these states right around us, they don't have a stay-at-home order. So people are still doing their thing, going out. But Minnesota's been taking it pretty seriously. The state is like a ghost town, basically, outside of folks just being outside to get fresh air and exercise and food.
Well, Black communities in the United States have a long history of fighting against oppression, organizing resistance. Like you have Martin Luther King, you have Malcolm X, you've got the Black Panther Party.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a great example for socialists all over the world. How can you see resistance mounting right now in face of this crisis? Can you see any such initiatives? Are you organizing one?
Yes. So there's a lot of organizing happening here in Minnesota, and I would say nationally, but specifically in Minnesota, we have different COVID relief funds, because one of the things that we know with our communities, specifically vulnerable communities like Black and Indigenous and immigrant communities, when these moments hit, like as much as we want to be ready to fight and shut stuff down, like we need resources. We need to make sure that these folks are able to get by, that they're okay. So that's what we've been doing a lot of, checking in, making sure that our people have resources, and in this time really trying to push for like the cancellation of rent, the freezing of mortgages, and really, I think, begin to talk about this world that we want to envision and this world that we want to live in. Because in organizing and in radical movement work, we always talk about liberation, but there's not this shared analysis for what liberation looks like for all of us. But now I'm having these conversations with some of our leaders and other organizers. We're beginning to see like that all the stuff that we thought wasn't possible is possible. Like police can actually stay 6 feet away from someone they're encountering and not, invade their space and be hyper aggressive like from the start. Businesses can pay people to work from their home. They can pay disabled folks to work from their home. Their rent cannot be a thing. Like housing is not a commodity, it's a human right. We're starting to see like systems bend. They're not doing it for us. They're doing it because they want to make sure that corporations and stuff are safe. But we're seeing like all the stuff we've been asking for, or a lot of the stuff we've been asking for just happen. Like prisoners are being let out of prison. They're letting people who have nonviolent offenses go. And right now we're doing a lot of, I feel like, strategizing and figuring out what we can push, because this is such a unique moment where I don't think things are going to go back to normal, and there has to be work being done to make sure that they don't go back to normal, and also those relief funds to make sure that our communities are supported and okay right now.
Well, these are necessary short-term measures, like just in order to avoid a complete breakdown of the system. Which system do you stand for?
Definitely socialism. So one of the things, I guess I should say, that I definitely don't believe in a two-party system, first and foremost. And I feel like a lot of organizers and organizations are beginning to sway that way, because none of them are actually for us. So definitely socialism. I don't know if you were following Bernie's campaign at all throughout the US, but a lot of what Bernie was pushing for, we were on it. And so Yeah, I think it is it's taking back poverty. It's like people having ownership of land, private sectors.
There is this question about Bernie Sanders's campaign, which has hit the political scene in the United States and in the world quite hard. But then again, he's just pulled back and decided to support Joe Biden. One of the main causes he championed was universal healthcare, which Joe Biden has just made sure got swept under the rag because that's too radical, apparently to him. Can you still support the Democratic Party, or should you look for another candidate? I mean, there is the Green Party in the United States, which is more left-wing. What do you plan to do?
That's I don't think we've really made a decision as a movement like what we're going to do. I think that was really on us for putting all of our eggs in one basket in a way, because I don't think that a Green Party candidate would have enough financial backing to
win.
At least not in the next 4 years or this next election. We were also pushing him to say more and more like abolition of police, because that's something that we believe in. We believe that we should be able to police our own communities. Yeah, he was a very movable candidate. And so I think we're in the boat where we're trying to figure out what the next steps are, because Joe would be really dangerous to have in office.
Yes.
Extremely, yeah. So yeah, I honestly don't have an answer to that question.
We don't honestly even know whether he can win, because Hillary Clinton was said to be the most viable candidate, and she we all saw the result. Well, as with
honestly,
Donald Trump,
I don't want to speak it up, but you just said Trump, but we don't want this at all. But the way he's positioning himself, because he literally just gave everyone in the country $1,200 stimulus check, because he's trying to boost the economy, up, just like he's trying to keep it afloat or whatever he's trying to do. Really, he just got hella votes, and that was my fear with this check. Like every American is getting, not every American. They're saying tax-paying Americans, but we know immigrants here also pay taxes, but they're not getting a stimulus check. So it's going to be tricky. I honestly, I'm really nervous for this next election, because I feel like Trump is going to have it. But really what it's feeling like is we got to let go of this two-party system. And I think what's going to birth out of this, because what happens with pandemics, if you look at history, when there's a pandemic, like revolution happens, like right along with it. And so I'm really hoping that we're able to use this moment to really radicalize like the American consciousness around like what's needed. We're in this unique place where this isn't, a Black Lives Matter movement where you have Black folks who have this movement specific to them and everybody supporting it. This is not an immigrant rights movement where it's specific to, one group of people. This is affecting everybody. So I'm hoping that what's been missing in our movement work is this intersectionality and us having like a shared analysis on what liberation is as like one movement, not like 40 movements within one. I'm hoping that this moment really brings us together and just, I want revolution to come out of this, to be completely transparent. And I don't know what that looks like, but yeah, there needs to be, things just can't happen. Business as usual can't continue. I think I would just like to say that America could learn a lot from Brazil, because I think about the way you all organize all the time, and I was very envious of that 298 city strike like that united front when, and I'm like, the message was like, you know, we want Michel Temer out of office. And I was like, that hasn't happened in the US.